Okay, so today what I want to do is I want to share a really awesome framework from the book Secret Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda. Now, I actually had the pleasure of meeting the actual Don Juan, so the shaman or medicine man that he actually resides in Tecate, Mexico. And I went down to his property and I spent a day with him down there doing a Native American sweat with some of his family members. And it was really, really awesome experience. And it's kind of a funny story, our interaction. So I'm gonna actually share that with you after I go over the framework from the book. So the book is, there's a lot of cool things in it, but he talks about becoming a man of knowledge. And he says there's 4 enemies that you have to overcome to become a man of knowledge. And I'm sure this applies to women too. And the first enemy is fear. When you overcome fear, you develop clarity. And then clarity becomes your second enemy. When you overcome clarity, you develop power. But then power becomes your third enemy. And when you overcome power, then you become a man of knowledge. But at that stage, old age becomes your next enemy. So I want to go over how I interpreted that, because it's funny. I was thinking about it just, as I scan and kind of analyze the world recently. And I was thinking about, this first thing, fear. This is such a big thing for people to get over. But when you do get over fear, you develop this clarity within you, meaning you can see things clearly because you're not afraid of things anymore. So if you want to do something, you don't have fear clouding your vision or telling you, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that, or maybe you should do it this way, or like, I don't know if you could do that. You don't have these things clouding your vision. So you're clear, you're ready to go take action and do what you need to do to be the person that you want to be. And this is a hump that most people never even get over, right? Most people don't actually get to the point of clarity where they can see clearly without fear. But if they do get over that point, then this is how clarity can become the next enemy. Now you see this a lot in, what comes to mind is the iconic image of a movie star or a musician that is fearless because they've created this amazing career and everything they do seems to work. And then they end up surrounding themselves with a bunch of yes men or yes women, people that just kind of agree with everything they say. And they basically run their career into the ground and destroy themselves because they are not willing to look at their own flaws, and they don't have any fears or any doubts about their opinions or their decisions, and everyone around them is telling them yes, so they just keep barreling on down their path without having a deeper awareness, and that ends up getting them in trouble in the long run, right? So this is very much like the archetypal story of the adolescent warrior before they've actually became the real warrior. The warrior that has a lot of fighting skill, that's very courageous, but doesn't know where their limits are, right? So they've gotten over their fear, but they don't know what their limits are. They don't really know where their blocks are, where their blind spots are. So they're not that wise yet. And as a result, they might courageously just fight anyone that comes in their direction or say yes to any battle. But this is kind of like the young buck that doesn't really know how to play the game wisely. And the next stage of developing power is developing the humbleness to understand where your limits are and then seek help so that you can make an intelligent and calculated decision about the things that you choose to engage in and about the endeavors that you choose to pursue. But once you develop that pursue, and once you develop that power, so the ability to see where your weak spots are and then compensate for them in whatever way that you can so you make the right kind of decisions, then you actually become powerful. You develop true power. Okay, so my camera died because it was so hot outside that it said it is overheated and it won't film anymore. So I'm gonna have to finish the rest of this video here in the car. So yeah, that's when you develop power. When you develop the ability to be humble enough to admit where you're wrong and then take advice and move with patience and be calculated in your decisions, right? But then power becomes your next enemy. And power becomes your next enemy because Once you develop power, if you don't have self-restraint, and the kind of self-restraint that can restrain you from running away with your desires, or letting your desires run away with you, I should say, then you become a slave to your desires. Meaning you have the power to do anything. But with the power to do anything, will you become a slave to whatever your desires are, and then just go ahead and basically get everything that you want and not be able to hold steady to a set of morals or your higher self's desires as opposed to your lower self's desires, right? And this is something that, I can imagine is probably a big issue for a lot of, say, like millionaire billionaires that have made it to the point where they have the kind of patience and the kind of self-control that you need in order to become a millionaire or a billionaire. But they have certain insatiable desires that they can't control. So that may be the desire for power or the desire for more money. You can think of all the things that, if you could do absolutely anything, you might get kind of psychotic about it if you didn't have self-control and a moral backbone, right? So power can actually become your enemy. But if you overcome power, then you become a man of knowledge, as he calls it, or a woman of knowledge. And as a woman or a man of knowledge, you then basically become a gift to the world because you can keep your moral grounding and you have the power to really do anything. So you basically have the capacity to become like a saint, right? You can change the world in a beautiful way. But then your enemy becomes old age. And this is because, at this point, when you've overcome all of these things, you've probably had to go through quite a few years on this planet, and you're getting into your older age. And at that point, one of the biggest challenges is to shake off, as he says, to shake off the fatigue that comes from being old, and then continue to have that life force energy to go towards these greater aspirations and greater gifts that you're giving to the world. So this is essentially my interpretation of those 4 laws. Some people might interpret it slightly different, but I think nonetheless, my interpretation has a lot of value there. So I wanted to share that with you. Now, luckily for you guys, I recorded my story with Grandfather Cochera while I was still out there, and then realized after I recorded it that I wanted to put it at the end of the video. So I'm going to shift back now to that original video, and you can hear my story of my interaction with Grandfather Cochera, or the famed Don Juan, as Carlos Castaneda calls him. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I was introduced to a man from a friend of mine that was one of the relatives. It may have been one of the sons of Grandfather Cochera. Now, Grandfather Cochera is a shaman or medicine man in Mexico, who is actually the authentic Don Juan from Carlos Castaneda's Secret Teachings of Don Juan. And I was given this contact number and told to go do a sweat at his house. And I believe it's one of his sons, because he has like hundreds of sons. He's one of those guys, Don Juan. And we went down to Mexico. We went to he has this huge property in Tecate, Mexico. And we went there, and there's people from all over the world. People are coming to meet him and, be healed by him and all this stuff. And, we sat in ceremony. So what we did was we did a Native American sweat. And so they took us in and, brought the coals in, and we sweated, and then we, rinsed off in our, in water that sage was soaked in. It was beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And then afterwards, he took me into to Don Juan, or Grandfather Cochera's actual room, to introduce me to him. And I was there with a friend of mine, and it was interesting. The guy has a presence. He's a powerful, powerful essence to him. And, so when I walked up, I looked him in the eye respectfully and I said, hey, how you doing? And he shook my hand, he shook my friend's hand. And then he said something in, it was either Spanish or it was, the original native language on that land. And it was like Conga or some sort of thing like that. And he like looked at me and shook his head. And I didn't know what to make of it because I didn't know what he meant by it or what he was actually saying, but it felt really powerful. And I was like, okay. And I looked over at his son, the guy that took me down there, and he looks at me and he goes, fuck yeah. And I was like, I didn't understand what was going on right there. I was like, so are you cheering on what he said? And he was like, he just said, fuck yeah. And I was like, oh, all right. So it was pretty funny because I was expecting this profound thing to be coming from him, but he was just like, fuck yeah, dude, good sweat. Anyway, so that's a little story about Grandfather Cochero. So thanks so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Hayes. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. If you have any questions, comments, put them in the comments below, and I'm excited to share more awesome content with you. So one love.